Welcome to All Things Pilates, Season 4. Though we can't know exactly what Joseph Pilates was thinking or feeling towards the end of his life, we do know he wanted the entire world to practice contrology, and that want has certainly become a reality. Hello, everyone. I'm Darian Gold, and here on All Things Pilates, we discuss the man, the method, and how his genius continues to influence and inspire. When Joseph Pilates was interned at Camp Knockaleo on the Isle of Man during World War I, little could he imagine that over a century later, a museum would be built very near where he was interned. The Knockaloe Visitor Center took almost 10 years from its concept to its grand opening in 2019. At the helm of this visionary project is our guest today, Alison Jones. Although we know that Joe Pilates was interned at Camp Knockaloe, there is a larger story here, and Alison is going to share it with us. Hello, Alison. Thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Hello, it's lovely to be here, Darren. Thank you for inviting me.
Alison, how long have you lived on that Isle of Man?
So I've been here about 30 years now. And for the last 20 of that, I've lived where I live now, which is in a little village called Patrick on the west of the island.
How did you learn about Camp Knockaloe?
So Patrick is part of it's a little tiny village, and it has an old school, it has a church, and it has lots of farmland around it, a few houses. And I got involved in village life, I suppose, became aware of the fact that there were graves in our church graveyard that related to internees from Knockaloe. I was very aware, we started to become more aware of the fact that descendants were actually visiting this large farm area, which was directly in front of the old school. And also I got involved in looking after the school, this old school building, which it was an old Victorian school. It was it had been ceased being a school many years ago. And we were looking after it and trying to make it a good community space, having harvest festivals and things like this. But it was a damp and crumbling building. So we were looking for what to do with our building. And we just became more aware of the camp over the road from the building and started to think a little bit more about how we could link the two together.
How did you actually know, though, that the Camp Knockaloe was even there?
So, I mean, to be honest, there's not an awful lot. Before we actually started all of this, there's very little that tells you that there was a camp there. So there is one sign at the very entrance to the large farm. There's a sign that talks about the fact that during World War I, there were around 23,000 men were interned there in that farm. And then there's another smaller sign up on one of the buildings further up when you actually get into the farm, but you have to get right into the farm to see that, which also commemorates the fact that it was an internment camp. But that's all that was there. But it was just a growing awareness of these little clues around our village that started to give a sense of the fact that there had been something quite significant here over 100 years ago.
Then how did it lead you from more awareness that there was this World War I POW camp to then becoming the visionary and bringing this project to light? And now across the world, people know, based on your amazing website, but in the beginning, I don't think you could have imagined where you are now, right?
No, definitely not. I mean, our initial thought when we were looking to save our little Victorian school building was, well, actually, as well as making it a community space, why don't we do an exhibition about the camp? Because we were aware of the fact that there were descendants coming to the island, wanting to actually go to the farm to see where their grandfather or great-grandfather was interned. But they there was nothing there to tell them the story. So we started to think, well, actually, maybe what we could do is to actually create something in the old school. So that actually it could be a visitor centre during the summer period so people could come and find out more. But at the start, I mean, all it was ever going to be was a little exhibition in a school, in an old school. We then launched with the website. We actually launched the website 100 years to the day to when the first internee moved into Knockaloe Camp. So that was on the 17th of November, 1914. We launched exactly 100 years later with the website. And we launched our Facebook page as well. And we had absolutely no idea that we were going to have engagement from all over the world about the project that we'd started. So yeah, it's been incredible, actually. It's been absolutely incredible, the interest in all of this.
So you went from this dilapidated building that you wanted to renovate so you could have a community center, so you could have festivals, et cetera. It started with that thinking. And then when you learned more about Camp Knockaloe, sort of across the street, or where is it in relation to where you are right now?
Absolutely. So I'm currently on Patrick Road, but just along at the end of our road is this the little school building, and directly opposite the school building is the camp. So if you are standing within our school building, in any of the rooms there, you can see directly into the camp, which is literally on the other side of the road. And then also around our visitor centre, as it is now, there is also the graves of the old graves. So there's the graves where the internees were buried during the time of the camp as well. So we're very much right in the centre of the whole story of Knockaloe Camp.
It seemed like an obvious progression in terms of, or evolution. Your mind was only thinking for your small village, but then when you learn more about this camp, that's directly across the street from this building. Now, how did you go from creating the concept to then actually the physical part? Did you bring an architect in, or did you bring builders in to?
Yeah, so we were working together as a committee within the village, and there were lots of people with sort of like different skills involved. And one of the members of the committee, Kieran, he was actually works within and is very senior within a large building firm, and he created the drawings. So we used the old building as was. We didn't really touch the old building. What it had was some really dilapidated and dreadful extension done in the 1970s at the back. So that was totally demolished. The old lean-to toilets for the old school, they were removed. And we've got a lovely, wonderful bright area at the back, which has the kitchen and another community room where people can sit and have coffee and are welcome to just come and sit and have a look at the books and things about the camp, and that's where when we have descendants coming over, that's where we'll chat to them. So he designed this lovely space at the back that's attached to our old Victorian building. The Victorian building then also had problems with the roof, and there was a lot of damp coming through. So we had an awful lot of work to do on that. So we had builders from the island who actually came in then and did the work for us, which was great. But it took quite a long time to get to that point, really, where we felt that was actually a big decision to take, because the amount of work that was involved in doing that, we had to really feel that this project was actually that it was going to work, that it was going to justify, just what we were trying to do. So that was a big, big step when we started doing that. But we're so pleased that we have.
In the process, when they were renovating and demolishing and all of that, were you already starting your research?
Absolutely. So this was a point where we'd already got to the point where we'd launched the website. We'd actually, after launching the website and launching the Facebook page, and we started getting all this engagement, we'd already been doing an awful lot of research up to that point. And then it really started to build from there. We were getting just so many inquiries coming in. We were also starting to develop our collections, and we've got huge collections now of items that either we've been able to acquire or that have been donated, which are now on display in the visitor centre. But we also built up that. And so it's been yes, throughout the whole time of the build going on, this was happening. We were also, though, quite concerned at one point because the island was, there was some debate over whether the land itself would actually remain as a farm. And we were very worried about that. We were worried about the extent to which it would actually be secure and it would be worthwhile doing a visitor centre. So we had a little bit of work to do to convince government that actually it should be protected and kept for the people and kept as a space for descendants to come to. So that was all going on at the same time. And really the build actually came quite a long way down the line. This whole process of many years, that was actually very much towards the end of that when we really thought, right, okay, we know we've got it secure, land secure, we know where we're going, and we can actually really start the project of the build now in the knowledge that we'd got brought so much research together, and we felt we'd got something that was actually really of value to people visiting the island and also to our local island community as well.
People were aware of what you were doing on the island?
Yeah, I mean, we've had huge support from the island, actually. I have to say, the people of the island have been so supportive of the whole project. We gradually were trying to build awareness of what we were doing. But right from the very start, we launched with the story of one internee whose descendants actually lived on the island. You know, from that moment on, we really started to build the engagement with the people of the island. We also, one of the things that we wanted to do as time progressed was to do a really good, we started to do events and we started to do tours actually. Right? So I would take people for tours around the camp and give talks about what was there. So again, raising awareness that way. And then, of course, we then started putting on events such as our very large event in 2016.
Well, before we talk about that, how large is the camp? How many acres are we talking?
Oh my goodness.
That's
don't ask
that.
I should have that, shouldn't I? Can I answer the question in a different way?
Yes, please.
So the camp, as it was, consisted of these huge compounds. It consisted of 23 compounds, and these 23 compounds housed in each of them 1,000 people, or actually 1,020 people in the newer compounds. So actually the whole farm area is this huge space of all of these compounds. You can actually see when you actually come to the site, you can still see pretty much where the camp boundaries and where some of the compound boundaries actually were. So you get a real sense of it. The camp was actually huge, and it was surrounded by an incredible 695 miles of barbed wire. Obviously, sort of like crisscrossing and many kind of layers going up, but there were 695 miles of barbed wire. So that perhaps gives you a little bit of the sense of the scale of the whole place.
23,000 internees, they were all of German descent. And
yes, so what happened is when war broke out, they made a decision they were going to just round up. They were only ever going to round up the people who were in Britain, who they felt were potential spies. They'd already identified there was a sense of war, being imminent. They'd already identified who these people were. And that was all they ever intended to do. They were going to imprison the people who they felt might actually be a problem if they were left at large within the community. I think what they hadn't actually anticipated was, as the advance came, the German advance came towards the channel, the sense of the worry that people had about the enemy in their midst, as they called it at that time. And there was a real worry about the fact that you might actually be living next to somebody who might suddenly decide to, that perhaps had German reservist military training or something like that, and actually might ultimately
pick up their rifle.
Yeah, exactly. So gradually, as time progressed and as the war got steadily worse, they started to intern more and more people, and they needed to find somewhere to house them. And one of those places that they identified quite early on was on the Isle of Man, initially at a camp in Douglas, but then they also came to Knockaloe camp, which had been a former British military territorial army camp. And so they decided to set up camp there. But it was only ever going to be for 5,000 people. It was only then with the sinking of the Lusitania, which was en route from America coming over to Britain in May of 1915, when that was sunk by a German submarine, it changed the whole sense of the people within Britain, and also that spread elsewhere around the world. For example, to South Africa as well. There was a real sense of such anger against the country which had done this, which had sunk this ship, which had civilians on it, that actually there was a huge amount of rioting. So the decision was taken to imprison all of the men who were of military age, who were born in countries that Britain was at war with. And it was, the military authorities didn't want to do this. This was a costly exercise. It was going to mean they would need guarding. It was, they really didn't want to do this, but it was almost more public opinion really that pushed them to this point. So what it meant was there were a lot of men interned at Knockaloe who were family men. They'd moved over to Britain many, many years ago. They had British-born wives, British-born children, British-born sons fighting for Britain against Germany, but they were still interned because technically they were enemy aliens.
And one of those quote-unquote enemy aliens was our beloved Joseph Pilates. Had you ever heard of him?
Well, in fact, actually, many years before we got involved in any of this, I'd had back problems, and I looked into it, and Pilates seemed to be recommended as something that actually could strengthen my back. So I'd been doing Pilates classes long before this whole project was conceived. So it was quite incredible, really, when I started to understand the link between the fact that actually Pilates had actually been living on Knockaloe in the village, just a couple of miles from where I was actually taking Pilates classes and a methodology that he'd created. And did you heal? Did your back heal? It did, absolutely. Oh no, I think the Pilates is such an incredible methodology. It really is, and it really works in terms of, I went from having to use painkillers for my back to actually strengthen it. And absolutely. No, it really is such an incredible methodology. So yeah, it's quite that must have inspired you to keep moving forward. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing people want to understand about. There was Joseph Pilates he was such an incredible man, and took the time when he was there at Knockaloe to sort of like really, I think, understand and think about what the kind of methodology that he was ultimately going to develop. He talks a lot about, there's different things that he talks about that he either talks specifically about his time in the camp, or he alludes to that. And you can see from, in terms of how they lived within the camp, what they had available to them, what they didn't have available to them, the amount of time they had really to sort of like consider. He talked in the Sports Illustrated article in 1962 about the fact that he was inspired by watching the cats who were stretching. And I have to say, well, after that, you start to think about the stretching exercises you're doing in Pilates, and start to envision you're a cat. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But Pilates was one of his story is fascinating, but there's so many fascinating stories. It's incredible, artists, musicians, that, amazing stories, and so interesting to tell. They were already practicing their art or their craft when they were interned. Yeah. So, we had, there were people, the people that were interned, many of them actually had been working for a long, long time in Britain. So we had, for example, incredible cabinet makers. There was furniture being made at Knockaloe that was being done to Charles Rennie Mackintosh designs, and they were being made in the camp. Because you've got to think that, so many of the men that weren't actually in prison were actually called up. They were on the front line. So actually there was there were opportunities within the camp to actually work if you wanted to. Some internees believed that politically it wasn't right to work. They were very much more German, and they felt that they didn't want to be aiding the enemy. Others, as I said, were very much, they felt that they were they were British. There were some, there were people who are interned who'd lived in Britain since they were really quite young, relatively young. They've got Cockney accents, London accents, and all sorts of things. So yeah, there was a lot of different people within there. But wherever possible, they would carry on the skills that they were using before they were interned.
When you were looking for family members, most of that process, they came to you via website and Facebook. Did you find any family members of Joe's?
We would love to have family members of Joe's coming to contact us. We haven't been specifically contacted by family members, but yeah, it'd be lovely to think that they would do, because we'd really love to understand more about his story, but also to be able to talk to them about how he would have experienced internment. But we tend to it tends to be people contacting us. So we very much hope that one day one of his descendants will get in touch. That would be amazing.
It would be amazing. During World War I, the Spanish flu, a pandemic, broke out across the world. Did it impact those living on the Isle of Man?
It did. Eventually, the Spanish flu did come over to the island. There was actually an initial sort of like bout of flu that the island tried to play down, and they said, "Oh no, it wasn't the Spanish flu." But actually, the whole situation then is so similar to what's happened in our recent pandemic, because being an island, it was actually just that little bit more protected from the people coming over. And it was very much just as it was with COVID. It was very much that the people were spreading it. It was the people moving around who were actually spreading it from one place to the next. It did come to the island because we did have, for example, we had soldiers coming back on leave, or we had, or perhaps being invalided out of the army, who would actually then come over to the island. There were reports in the newspapers that internees coming to the island, because there were a lot of movement between the camps, that they actually brought the Spanish flu. But it has to be said that within the camp itself, there were minimal. There was Spanish flu. There was an outbreak of it, and it was a serious outbreak. But they'd actually got within the camp, they'd got quite a strong hospital system. So there were actually 5 separate hospitals within the camp. One of them was an isolation hospital as well. So they were really ready to deal with the fact that there could be, because they needed to be ready to deal with, for example, an outbreak of cholera or something like that. They needed to be prepared for that. Absolutely. And so they were very, when you look at actually what they were doing, they would eventually, when there were an awful lot of people had it, they would put them actually in the recreation huts, and they keep them separate to they tried to keep people who had it separate. And as a result of which, there were actually very few deaths within the camp. There has actually been formally recorded, a gentleman called Mike Kelly on the island has done some work for us, and they actually formally recorded 12 deaths from influenza. But there were also a few other deaths from pneumonia. So it could be that, there was some linking with the Spanish flu on that. And I think, possibly we talk about how open air and everything is so good, and getting outside and things. It has to be said that those huts were well ventilated, possibly in a way that they
didn't need it. Yes.
So yeah, and there was a lot of fresh air really in that camp. So possibly that helped them actually.
How cold does it get there in the winter?
It's not, because we're in an island, sort of in the Gulf Stream. We don't tend to get it doesn't tend to get that snowy or anything. So we get it's cold. It's very cold. What there is, and what Knockaloe really suffers from, is a really icy a wind, a really bad wind, and when you get a cold wind, that's really harsh. There was snow. We've got there's some paintings and pictures that have been done about when it was snowing there, but that was quite an unusual occurrence. So, but the wind, it can really whip around those fields. It really can. So that would have been cold.
The pandemic that we have now, was Isle of Man impacted, or just minimally?
Pretty much in a similar way. Looking back at the Spanish flu, it came to the island, and then what the island did was it quite quickly locked down. So we actually we had a point where we'd started to get the cases that were starting to rise. They were really starting to rise. The hospital was struggling with the number of people that were being hospitalized. And we got to a point where actually the decision was taken to lock the island down. So like for myself, I've got daughters who are students. We were told to get them back to the island as quick as possible. And at that point, the island literally was closed. So we actually were closed for many, many months. But what it meant was that we could get rid of COVID totally. So we were able to we were walking around. We didn't even start using masks for about a year, I don't think, because we were sort of free of COVID. It was really nice not to have that. It was hard though on some of the families. There's quite a lot of say grandparents here that weren't able to see families in the UK. That I think has been really tough. But generally, I think we were very lucky. And we went through a period where it was so dreadful elsewhere, and we were so lucky to have, once we actually came out of lockdown, we were lucky then to be able to be free on the island to just enjoy life as normal.
It affected, though, this visitor center in terms of visitations, right?
Absolutely. What was really hard is with the fact that, so we opened in 2019. That was our first year of opening. We opened to coincide with when the first internees actually started leaving the camp, which was in 1919. So 100 years after Joseph Pilates left to be repatriated back to Germany, we opened the Visitor Center. So we were open for 1 year, and then COVID came. So then we were shut. So we were shut the next year, and then we had limited opening for the second year. So we're now back to a point where this year we're going to be open properly again, which is wonderful, really good. So we're back to normal, which is fantastic.
Very fantastic, because I bet you a lot of people want to go now.
Yeah, I mean, we've got so much interest this year. We've got loads of descendants who've contacted us. We've got people coming over from America who we've been talking to during the pandemic. I mean, we were working, even though the visitor centre was closed, we've been talking away to descendants throughout the whole time. So we've got loads of visitors who are actually booked in. We've got cruisers. We have cruisers that come, that stop off at the island, and they come to the visitor centre. They're actually American. It's a cruise that's actually for American visitors, which is fantastic. We've got loads of people coming from the UK, from Germany. So yeah, we're actually, it's wonderful.
You better tighten your seatbelt.
Absolutely. It's really going to be busy this year, which is fantastic, which is what it's all about, really.
In 2016, there was a big Pilates event on the island. In fact, it was held on the grounds of Camp 4. Is that correct?
Absolutely. So we wanted to we thought it would be a lovely way to raise awareness of what we were doing, to kind of reach out to descendants, but also to celebrate the fact that it's amazing that this whole Pilates methodology started, a lot of the inspiration for it actually started at Knockaloe. So we decided that what we'd really like to do is we'd like to get 1,020 people, 1,020 being the maximum number of internees who could be housed within the type of compound that Joseph Pilates was in. So we wanted to get 1,020 people actually practicing Pilates on Camp 4, where he was interned. So the specific camp where he was interned. So we arranged this in September 2016. And if you actually look on our website, we've got the amazing images of all of these people, a huge class of people all carrying out Pilates, and each of them were given a t-shirt. We'd had these t-shirts created, which had an image of the internees 100 years earlier, just in that same area, who were actually doing the kind of gymnastics, the physical culture, which was very much practiced in Germany. So this is actually what Joseph Pilates' father was very much involved in, this whole physical culture. And so we'd actually so they each had a picture on the front, an original photograph from 100 years earlier of internees doing gymnastics, which is kind of very much Pilates style exercises on the t-shirt. And it was just an amazing event. It really was. It was absolutely incredible. We went out onto the BBC, the national BBC News, which was brilliant.
To advertise for it.
So yeah, just to raise awareness. And the main aim really was to get descendants to contact us. And they did. We've had so many descendants contact us and share their family stories. And that's what this is all about, sharing these family stories and actually raising awareness of this very hidden part of history.
The 1,020 people, mostly from the island, or they came over from Britain?
We had 1,020 registered. On the day, we actually had just over 800, which we were happy with, but 1,020 registered, which is what we wanted. On the day, the weather in the morning had been horrendous, but thankfully it improved just before the class. It was brilliant. Yeah, we got people coming over that's actually specific to come over for Britain for it. So, but we really advertised it mainly via our Facebook page and via our website. So it was, most of the people were from the island, and we had lots of the Pilates instructors on the island actually would bring their Pilates classes to the event. So, which was lovely. It was so nice to get so many people together. It's fantastic. Really good.
800 people are practicing the mat exercises.
We actually thought, because it's a field that was actually, so the camp is based on this farm, and a lot of the time it actually had cattle on there. So we thought maybe mat-based exercises might be a little bit challenging with possible cowpats. So it was actually standing exercises, but they had bands, the stretch bands as well. So there was various standing exercises. And then we had some seated Pilates as well. So it would have been nice to have done mat-based classes as well. But yeah, we felt that the terrain didn't lend itself to that. So
did you speak? Yeah. Did you speak at the event?
So I started off by we wanted to give a sense of that history, the fact that this was 100 years after Pilates had actually been in that camp, and just give a real sense of sort of like the fact that this was actually quite an occasion that we were doing. So yeah, did a little introduction, and then introduced we'd invited one of the local instructors on the island, Lizzie Main, to take the class, which she'd very kindly accepted the challenge of doing. And then at the end of it, just to mark the occasion of just how significant it was that we were actually doing this event using a methodology that 100 years ago had been created by an internee in that camp. I mean, it was quite something. So yeah, people talked about how they found it really it was special. It was definitely special.
Very special. Do you have footage and photographs?
There is footage. So we've got lots of photographs on the website. And if you go on our Facebook page, there is actually the interview with the BBC that when they interviewed me, and the class was going on in the background. So yes, if people want to have a little look, it's on the website.
Can you give us the name of your website and your Facebook page? So
the website is Knockaloe.im. It's as simple as that. Knockaloe.im, IM being the short for the Isle of Man. And if you actually go onto there, you can click through to our Facebook page from there. So,
and the name of the Facebook page is
Knockaloe Internment Camp, ION.
That's great. Are you still practicing Pilates to this day?
I do still do. Actually, I do still do Pilates. I've not had. Well, that being said, I do.
Speak the truth here.
Shall we just say it's been challenging since the visitor centre opened. It's been non-stop. It really has. So I think exercise is something that I'm returning to. Let's put it that way. But actually, I've noticed I need to do. I actually know.
You can feel the difference if you've been sitting too much.
And I know that I need to start again. So I shall be. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, you heard it here, everybody. She's getting back to her Pilates practice. You've had lots of support from the locals on the island, and you've also had very special support from the Pilates community. And one person in particular, would you like to speak about him?
Absolutely. I'd really like to, say thank you actually to Jonathan Grubb. So I know you've interviewed him previously, and he's always been hugely supportive of what we've been doing. And I would really like to say thanks to him and to Carolyn for their support and their just constant, unwavering positive, their positivity about what we're doing, and always, raising awareness of what we're doing. And we've just really appreciated that, because we've had, there's times when it's been quite hard and, you're struggling against an awful lot of things and all of this. And actually it's that support that we've had from people like Jonathan and Carolyn and other people on the island and off the island as well. But there's a huge number of people on the island who quietly but very steadily really supported what we've done. And I can't tell you just how much we've appreciated that. It means a huge amount, that does. So yeah, I'd like to just say a big thank you.
And Jonathan is one of those descendants.
That's the incredible thing, really. It's I think Jonathan comes from the perspective of his interest in Pilates, from a Pilates side of things. But actually, he's also a descendant of an internee in Camp 4 at Knockaloe. So, as one of our descendants as well, he also has a very special place in all of this, because we actually feel very strongly about our descendants, that it's time that their family stories are told. That's so much a part of what we're trying to do here, tell these hidden histories that the families have kept quiet all of this time. So it's been amazing, Jonathan sharing his family story with us. And then by, that linking through to the whole Pilates story and his interest in Pilates as well. So it's amazing. You never know when you meet somebody, you just don't know where it's going to take you. We've met so many really interesting people in all of this. So it's been fascinating. The whole thing is fascinating.
I agree. 100% fascinating. And thank you for your contribution and for you being at the helm and driving this until we have what we have now.
Oh, thanks so much. We really appreciate those words, and we just appreciate and your support as well, indeed, for this, because actually, things like being able to do this, being able to chat to you, and you reaching out to Pilates community,
yes,
on the other side of the globe. That's amazing. But that's really lovely, and
it keeps growing. It keeps growing, and expanding.
It keeps growing. It's totally. We never ever could have imagined that it would become this big. We really couldn't. So thank you.
Woo, yes. Alison Jones, thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
All Things Pilates is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Darian Gold. Mastered audio mix by Fabian Romero. Theme music, Soul Blue Piano Shuffle by Boom Zoom. We are all here, but for a moment. How we prioritize our daily experience can be viewed like this. Imagine each 24-hour period as a box, and we can fill up this box until it's overflowing, or we can choose to place very little inside. But once a 24-hour cycle is gone, so is the box. A new box arrives in its place and presented to you the following day. What will you do with each new box that is gifted to you? As always, I remain in awe of Joe's work, and I look forward to being with you for another episode of All Things Pilates.